the camera, and then I have to show you the that's not gonna work. Okay, let's see. The problem is that the Wi-Fi is usually not reliable for recording. Okay, so we will split this lecture into two parts. In the first part, we will sort out the logistics and the assignments of the topics. And in the second part, we will discuss a little bit one of the articles that is listed for the course, which is the Parkinson disease study. If you haven't read the article, then while we're sorting the topics, you may kind of scan through the paper. So who read the paper? It was kind of a late announced, so you might have not read it. So yeah, use this time to sort of scan it. We will go in kind of more details through the paper. So if you haven't read it, you will be okay today. Yeah, let me see. Like this one. What we should see is okay. So I went through the list, and I haven't finished the list because we have to agree on the topics first, and then we will agree on the reviewers and people who are writing the counter arguments. Because, for example, we had some reviewers signing up for this topic, but I'm not sure if that topic will run. So it depends who picks that topic. So we have to do the topics first, right? So if you are not on the list, if you go to a fronter page, everybody has a laptop?
I'm not pointing to some network connection.
What's that? There is no network? Okay.
So I have tablets with
So, all right, so there is not so many of us, so we can kind of do it individually. So who would like to do the user experience or UI on mobile devices as a topic? You emailed me before?
Yes.
Both of you?
This was like the second priority for myself.
Right. So what's your name?
Ardi?
Are you on the list here already?
No.
I haven't got to your name. We can have both of you doing it. So what would you like to cover?
I was thinking about smart home technologies, something about, but not exactly. I don't know something specific.
And well, how about you?
It was something about the problematic of smartwatches and small displays and displaying.
Yep. Okay. So, yep. Sounds good to me. We can do both. So, yeah, let me bring that back. What was the name?
Ardi?
Yeah, this one. Yeah, so I haven't done this yet. All right, so let's do this. I will copy you. And we will split that. What was your name?
Teresa.
Teresa. With H or without H?
With H.
With H? All right. So that's great. Anyone wants to do wearable sensing? What's your name?
Riken.
Say it again.
Riken.
Like this?
And D.
Good. Anyone wants to do? Yeah. So Jan, where are you? Jan Gregor, you want to swap to monetization more, right? Or a slash monetization? Somewhat. Okay. So we can. Anyone wants to do monetization models? Nope. So we kind of say.
Just more along the lines of mobile revenue.
Like this?
Yeah, just mobile platforms.
For example.
Okay.
And how specifically what we
Anyone wants to do ethical considerations? Ethics in mobile space or in wearable tech or data privacy and so on? No? So potentially that one is gone. So if that one is gone, Håkon and Sergey cannot review those. Håkon, where would you like to be moved? What other topics would you like to do?
I'm not sure. Can I maybe afterwards?
Yes, we can do it. So for reviewing and counter arguments, we can wait probably until next Tuesday. But we have to have topics sorted today, right? So who is not on the list of topics yet? Okay, so what topics? What?
Oh, I actually selected topics from the list above. I didn't look at the schedule,
Yeah.
but
That's fine.
okay. So I wanted to do efficiency and optimization.
Efficiency and optimization.
Not in the schedule.
Anybody else wanted to do efficiency and optimization? Sold. Sorry. Yep. Oops. Next.
I chose both mobile GPUs and GPU-based processing, or releasing and updating mobile apps. I don't know exactly what that would mean, though.
Anyone else wants to do GPUs? Okay, fight. So what exactly would you like to do? What was the other topic you wanted to do?
Me? Releasing and updating mobile apps.
Yeah, anybody else wants to do releasing and updating mobile apps? Elaf, do I spell your name correctly?
Tellf.
Yep. So you will do GPUs, and we had, what was that?
Mobile GPU and GPU-based processing.
Yeah,
General topic.
processing. And you wanted to do, what, say it again?
Releasing and updating mobile
Yeah.
apps.
Applications. Great. And your name is?
Thomas, with H, yes.
Okay. Who wanted to do strengths and weaknesses? There was some people wanting to do that, I remember.
Well, I did that for the
reviews.
mobile and wearable devices. But
Yeah, I did that also, but yeah, I can review that if it's possible.
Okay.
That's mobile and wearable devices limitation and strength, or
Yes.
if the cloud thing is taken, I can take it. The mobile.
Okay, what was your name?
Mile.
Like this?
Yeah.
Great. And you guys wanted to be potential reviewers. And I already forgot your name.
Artit?
Artit, yeah. So I have you here. I'm really bad with names, sorry. I'm trying. I play games to remember names, but I'm still terrible. I remember your faces though.
So we're trying to have one student on each topic.
Yes, so we're trying to have one student on each topic as a main topic. If we have a topic which is general, like UX or augmented reality, we can have more than one. So I'm not very religious that only one person can do it. But the two people need to have a slightly different take on a topic,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So like with the UX, his idea was to be a little bit more general about smartphones and kind of handheld devices. And your idea was a little bit more focused on possibly wearables, more screen form factors. So kind of slightly different angles on the UX. So we will kind of, in the first case, we decide who is doing what, and then in the second round, we decide which papers are suitable for each of the topics. And if they are, distinct enough, that's fine.
Yeah, I'm not on the list, and I could take the health and education.
Okay. So you want to take health or education, or both, or one of those? So I recommend taking one.
Yeah.
Because we don't have a huge report to write. You only have, 500 words or whatever to write, what we agreed.
1200.
Yeah, 1200. So maybe choosing either health or education.
Yeah. I think I'll go with education.
You go with education. So we'll add education here.
This is in the center of these of serious games.
Yeah, I thought about that.
That's right. So some of the topics do overlap, right? So if you are preparing here educational apps, which happen to be games on mobile devices, you can kind of piggyback the similar topic onto the serious games in education. It just happened that those games are mobile, right? So there is a certain overlap between those two subjects. And we kind of, okay, here we are focusing on the mobile aspects of those games, whereas in the other course, you will focus on the game aspects of those apps, right?
Yeah, I'm not thinking about doing two courses in one, so.
It's fine. Yeah, what was the name?
Lars. Yeah.
Right, and there was one person who wanted to be a reviewer for the strengths and weaknesses. Was it you? Yeah, what's your name? Yeah, I remember. I just typed it some yeah. Good. I'm getting better. Okay. Yes.
I want to take topic image and video processing, and I want to, if it's possible, to speak about like application for iris recognition on the mobile.
Okay. So I will say iris. Okay, and what's your name?
Maria.
Okay. So we'll adjust the papers to fit more into that category, right? Focusing more on the iris recognition. Again, this topic is big, like, you may have many subtopics into this topic. Okay, who else is in the room and not on the list yet? So you already, all of you are on the topic list, on the first column, somehow, somewhere. I try to make it bigger, but right. So we have Adit, Teresa, Håkon, Sergej, Tonje, Jan Gregor, Magnus, Birken, Maria, Martin, Telaf, Lars, Mila, and Thomas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, so we have about 9 people who are not assigned yet. Okay, so those people who are not assigned, those probably listening to us on the podcast, please email me your preference for the topic. And then for everybody, you will email me the articles that you would like to be included, 1 or 2, okay? Let's say it's, if the article is more than 10 pages, it can be 1. If there is a short article, like less than 10 pages, let's make 2 or 3. So let's make the read count to be between 10 to 20 pages. If the article is more than 20 pages, it's okay, but we try to find something which is not overly large. So I would say, I don't know, 25 pages limit. You can pick the articles from the lists which we have linked here. So the course ran before, and we had articles kind of selected. So for some of the general topics, the articles there are still relevant. And we make a tick or make a list of all those articles that are kind of for this course, for this semester. So we should have about 20, yeah, there are 23 people in the course, so 23 articles. Some people will have 2, so we may have about 30 articles to read. Make sense? So you have to read the articles before reviewing somebody else's piece, right? So you need to know the piece and the articles, because otherwise you cannot judge if they actually talking based on this article or just talking nonsense. So it's a requirement that you kind of read the article and the piece that people prepared. And we agreed on a deadline for doing the pieces. So whoever will not be on the list until next Tuesday is sort of in trouble, because everybody needs to have the assigned topic and need to prepare the piece by a certain deadline, and then those pieces get reviewed in the second half of the course. So those, I stress again that those people who are not on the first column here need to email me the topic plus selection of articles by next Tuesday. So by next Tuesday, everybody needs to have a topic and the selection of articles already is assigned. Apart from that, we need, we agreed for everybody to do 3 reviews and 2 kind of counter arguments. So we need a number of reviewers and counter arguments. We will balance that. So it's not that everybody will have 3 and 2, like we probably will not have that. We may have to sort of balance how it pans out, right? That everybody has sort of the same number of reviews and counter arguments. So the people who already selected, they preferred topics for reviews, they're already here. If you're not in the second column, then you have to email me your preferences. If you emailed me already and I haven't processed you yet, then you may just remind me that you've already done that. So I've done most of the people. I stopped. Yeah, I stopped on Jan Gregor here. So I haven't done Thomas and up yet, but I will do. So I have, I have a number of people who already emailed me. I just didn't process it yet. Yes.
Question to the counter paper.
Yeah.
What if a person writes a really good paper and we just can't counter the paper?
That's right. So we discussed it last class that it may happen. Then you just try to do your best. And if the paper is really good, then you kind of say, well, they kind of covered all the arguments which come to my mind, and that's it, right? So you sort of try to summarize it that it is a good paper, right? So try to point things in the original piece that make it a good one to counter argue against. So you just sort of make a case that it is a good paper then.
For strengths and weaknesses for mobile devices,
Yeah.
I only see like a list of bullet pointed good stuff in bad stuff, but not
no papers.
No paper.
Yeah. So in that case, you try to find the paper. So on the fronter page, we have topics which we covered, and we have sometimes a long list of papers, and we have topics which we haven't covered, and we don't have a list of papers. Strengths and weaknesses wasn't discussed as a paper discussion in the previous year or 2 years. It was sort of a topic that everybody needs to know, but based on their own sort of search. We actually didn't even have a class on that. We kind of assumed everybody will know, battery life, follow the list, right? Some of the key elements, but we didn't have a kind of a scientific paper about it. If you will not be able to find one, like a paper about this, just try to be creative and pick a kind of a narrower something which relates to it, which talks about something that you want to talk about and write about. So this is kind of a broad one. There might not be research covering strengths and weaknesses in general. There might be some papers focusing on battery life, or some paper focusing on the screen size, or some papers focusing on the processing power or something, but not on everything in a single paper. So you just make a decision. You pick one around this area and then focus on that, right? Yeah. Last year you still have a lot of help here. There is still a large number of papers which is listed in the fronter page that you can reuse for your topic. If it happens that your topic doesn't have a list of papers, or you want to discuss, like Jan Gregor, he wants to discuss kind of revenue models, and he found some interesting case to base his piece on, that's great. Then he can use his own article on his own sources, and we kind of encourage you to do that. Make sure that you're taking responsibility for the sources, right? We have on those lists, we have articles which are bad articles, which we have on the list as an example of an article which you're kind of not supposed to use an argument in the kind of a serious discussion, right? And by reading the papers, you can sort of judge it. If you're not sure, you can talk to me or talk to somebody in the class. So not all the papers listed on the fronter page are good examples of papers that you should use as arguments in your scientific sort of argumentation. And some of them have, very weak evidence, or they have a very poor methodology, or they have a lot of confounding variables, and the results are kind of speculative. So you have to be quite careful in choosing your sources, but that's part of the course, to be able to judge if the source is reliable or not, right? And it's not like you cannot feel about something that I have an opinion about something, and this source confirms my opinion, therefore it's a good source, because it's not the case necessarily that something that confirms your own opinion is necessarily actual good evidence for that opinion. We tend to have this sort of a self-reinforcing bias when we're making judgments. So if you have certain pre-existing opinion, for example, that software testing is good, and you read an article suggesting that software testing is really good, and you say, yeah, that's a good article, right? You kind of don't have a very critical analysis of the paper. If you read a paper, however, which suggests that software testing fails to improve the quality, you'll be very skeptical. You will be reading the paper very thoroughly, and we will be finding some weak spots in the paper because it counter-argues your own opinion. So you have to kind of clear your mind a little bit, and when reading papers, you have to sort of judge them on the face value, not based on the opinions that you have or arguments that you want to bring forward. But feel free to suggest your own sources. The only restriction is that once you decide to use a certain source, then it needs to go on the list. That we kind of need to include it onto the proper list of all the articles or sources used for this course, because other people need to read your source as well, right? So please email me. If you're picking a paper from the list, which is already there, just email me the title. I will remove the X's on all the other papers and leave the X's on the selected papers only. And then if you want a new paper to be included into a topic which doesn't have a papers yet, then email me the paper title, the author, and the link to the article, and then I will put it on the front page. Make sense?
Can we use more than one paper?
So you can use as many papers as you want, but as we agreed, like if 23 people suggest 3 papers, that's like, 70 papers, and we're not gonna ask you to read 70 papers in, half semester course. So you can use more than one article, but you need to pick one which everybody else needs to read. So you need to pick kind of the best one that you think is valuable enough for everybody to read, but in your own piece, you can refer to other papers that you want, and you can choose as many as you want, right? That's fine. But for everybody else to read, you need to nominate a single paper, or if it's very short, you can have 2. So as I said, if you have a short paper, you can have 2 short papers instead of 1. Okay? All right, so what will happen is I will process the list of people which I haven't processed yet. So hopefully I have some names that are not on the first column yet. And then everybody will email me the selection of article for the topic that they are assigned to, and the preferences for being in the second column. I may treat reviewing and counter argument as the same activity. So you may be treated like if Martin told me, oh yeah, I would like to do something with the mobile ads. You can be as well a reviewer as well as a counter argument giver, right? I don't think there is a strong preference to one or the other. So you don't need to tell me whether you want to be a reviewer or counter argument person, but you just need to pick 5 things that you need to be one of those 2 roles in. That will be simpler. Most people didn't distinguish. I think 1 or 2 people distinguish those 2 roles, but most people who emailed me already, they just said I can be either. So let's say that you cannot distinguish. I just do it, by random assignments. It'll be easier for me to balance the list. Yeah, this format is a little bit crap. Because first of all, you need to find yourself in multiple places, right? So you need to be once in this column and 5 times in this column, right? Yeah, I don't really like that, because first of all, I don't know if the distribution is correct, and second of all, you don't know whether you kind of properly place neither, right? So what will happen is that I don't know how to do it on Fronter. So on Fronter, that's what will stay. Unfortunately, what I will do is I will create a Google spreadsheet, and I will put all your names on one side, and then assignments to 5 things along the topic numbers. So each topic will get a number here, and then we'll have basically a matrix. And then you just find your name and find your 5 spots, and that's it. And then that's what I will use for marking as well, right? So I will share that Google spreadsheet once we have this thing done here. I will, yeah, that's I will add it at the top. I don't know how to do it here. I mean, Fronter is a little bit limited. It's probably achievable by a smart table of some sort, because it's a grid as everywhere. But even editing this table is a bit tricky. So, all right.
So we should wait till, like, let's say Friday to see all the topics, and then choose 3 topics to peer review them, and 2 of them to.
That's right. That's right. So we need a deadline for the first column to be sorted, right? Yeah, that's the bottom. That's the milestone that holds everything else. So I mean, it's a little bit unfair because everybody in this room already is in this column, so we can say deadline is now. So what do you think is reasonable? Friday, and then Tuesday will be the one for final assignments on the right, on the second column. So Friday is the deadline for all the names being here and the topics being locked, and then next Tuesday is the deadline for this column to be locked.
So till Friday, we have to have also the paper that we are going to.
That's right. Yeah. Although on the paper is a little bit more flexible, so papers can wait till Tuesday. But the names need to be done by Friday. So the topic assignment and the names need to be done by Friday, and then if you have already papers, email me. If not, Tuesday is the deadline for papers, and Tuesday will be deadline for this. Yep.
I'm sorry, maybe you mentioned this, but is it okay if we choose one of the papers that is suggested?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's fine. So you can pick one paper which everybody needs to read, and then you can pick more than one for your own piece. So sometimes you have a couple of good papers for that particular topic, and it's worth mentioning more than one paper in your piece. But you can, of course, reuse the papers which are already on the fronter page. And some topics are quite well, some sources for some of the topics are well done in the fronter page. So you may have hard time finding better papers than those. Yeah, but you can still do it if you want, but you don't have to. You can use the papers which are there. Yep.
Let's say for my topic, I have found 2 papers.
Yep.
And one sort of blog article from the game company.
Yep.
The one from the game company is a lot better than the articles, but should I prefer to use one article instead of the blog?
Right. So I think in your particular case, it might be better for everybody else to read that blog post. But when you're building your evidence and when you're building your argument for something, then the blog post will come out weaker than the paper, right? So you may bring the paper in your argument. So you can sort of probably balance it this way.
So have people read the blog and base my main paper on the other papers. It's
plus the blog. I mean, you can still use the blog as well, right? But you will strengthen your argument if you bring the papers into your case as well. And people can read them if they want to, but if the blog is actually better and gives a better feel of the discussion, then let everybody read the blog post instead of the papers. But we can list all 3 things. So we can list both papers and the blog article and mark the blog article with X. So it's sort of a must read, and the other ones are optional reads. So you kind of make a call what is better for everybody else to read. If you feel it's better for them to read the blog post, it's fine. Yeah. So in the fronter page, you have kind of articles which are marked with X. Those are must read, and the ones which are not marked with X, those are optional reads. And when we were discussing the papers last year, we used some of the optional reads as examples of bad papers. Okay, did we cover everything? So Friday is the deadline for the first column and for the topic locks. Tuesday is the deadline for articles and for the review matrix to be set. Perfect. Okay, so now we go to the, we'll discuss the article that not everybody has read. So do you have the article now? So let's have a short break. You will browse through the article and like scan through it. It's not super long, so you probably will manage to read it actually in like 10 minutes.
This is the Parkinson?
Yeah, this is the Parkinson study. So let's do that. It's 10 to 2. Let's have 15 minutes. So we will start at let's say plus 5 minutes break. So let's start at 10 past. So we'll combine reading of the paper with the short break. Okay, so we'll start 2:10 with the discussion on the paper. Okay, so let's talk about the paper. You managed to read it? Not all? All right, so those of you who read it, what this paper is about? What's the main argument? And what's the main idea? Yeah?
That you can distinguish Parkinson's disease and essential tremor using the oscillation of the tremors without, for example, a smartphone.
Yes. And?
It worked.
Why it worked?
Because they have a slightly different oscillation pattern that you can use to distinguish them.
Right, so on the surface, yes, but you kind of miss the important aspect. So there were many groups trying to distinguish the Parkinson's tremor and essential tremor. So there are many causes of why people's hands shake, right? And when you have a shaky hand, you can measure the oscillation with the smartphone using the accelerometer. And many research groups tried that. And the problem is that if you see the characteristics, they kind of overlap. So those are sort of typical frequency patterns of different causes of how, why people's hands shake. And in particular, Parkinson's tremor and essential tremor almost entirely overlap, right? So on the shape of the oscillations alone, it's very difficult to distinguish those two, right? So we were kind of competing, and if you have patients sort of somewhere in the middle, you can't really distinguish it. You may have groups which kind of lean a little bit more to the left for Parkinson and a little bit to the right for essential tremor, and you have a clever kind of a machine learning algorithms, you can achieve reasonable results depending on your sample size. So depending on what those kind of you may have a representative group of essential tremor patients skewed a little bit to the right, and same here skewed a little bit to the left. And if your machine learning algorithm can pick that up, you will achieve a slightly better results, right? And that's what we tried first. We tried doing kind of a clustering and doing sort of clever wavelet kind of shape functions for distinguishing the tremor, but it was actually not working. So what kind of made this particular approach work? Anybody found that in the paper?
It was about the attention and distraction.
Exactly. So what this paper contribution is that so normally if you have a patient and you take the phone, you can get some spatial temporal data about the shake. And that's what people use. So you can, if you're really primitive, you can take a 3-axis accelerometer, kind of collapse it to a single acceleration pattern, and then you have a wave function of some sort. You may take all 3 axes, so you kind of see a 3-dimensional shake of the hand. Or you can take the orientation of the phone into account as well. So you now have, instead of a single variable in a very primitive case, you have 6 variables, because you have 3 degrees of freedom in the orientation and 3 degrees of freedom in the movement, right, in the acceleration, and so on. You can kind of make your algorithm smarter and smarter this way by including more data. And we tried it, and it was not improving the results much. But what we discovered is that if you make the people who have Parkinson to focus on what they're doing and then distract them, the tremor looks really different to people who have essential tremor who are also distracted or focused, right? And it's kind of the opposite effect. So a person with Parkinson's disease, if they are really focusing on a task, they will control the tremor better. The tremor will be smaller. And then if they are distracted, they have to do some cognitive tasks like counting downwards or solving some puzzles in their head, with closed eyes, their hands just go wild, right? Whereas with essential tremor, people's hands shake, and if they distract them, their hands shake the same, no change. And if we tell them to focus on the hands, their hands shake more, because they're really trying hard not to shake, and because of the biofeedback of the focusing mechanism, they will actually shake more than without focusing on the hand. So this extra variable make the kind of classifiers work much better, and we could achieve much better accuracy of the results. So that's the sort of the crux of the paper, and it is kind of, we say it straight in the abstract, right? We kind of pinpoint exactly why this paper is different to other papers trying to measure tremor or trying to distinguish between essential tremor and a Parkinson's disease. So I will kind of tell you a little bit background of the research, but I will also tell you some of the things about the paper itself, the structure of the paper, and some of the ways that we did the research, right? So one point to note here is that this paper is about measuring tremor and distinguishing between the Parkinson's and essential tremor, and it is done by using the influence of the attention and distraction to kind of as a factor in the research, in the classification. And we kind of do this, we tell it straight in the abstract. So in the abstract, we say what results we got, what this paper is about, and what is the kind of specific thing that is new. And it's kind of explained straight there. So when you will be doing your master thesis and you will be writing your abstract, you should kind of tell the same thing, right? So a person who reads this knows exactly what we did and whether that's relevant to their work or not, and whether they should read the paper or not if they want to know more details, right? They don't need to read the paper to know what this paper is about, what results we get, and how we did it. It's kind of just in the few sentences in the abstract. It doesn't tell the full story. It doesn't tell the background or anything like that. It doesn't tell exactly how we did it, but it is enough for a person to judge a relevance of that paper to them. So if somebody is doing kind of a classification of the tremor, they can read the abstract and they can see if this paper is relevant to them or not. So in your thesis, when it comes to writing, you will write the abstract as the last thing of your thesis, because it will be a kind of a very condensed summary of everything that you need to tell the reader, right? You may have 60 pages or 40 pages of text, and then in 20 sentences, you have to tell them exactly what this thesis is about. And you can only do it once you've written your thesis and you have everything, you have all the results there, all the conclusions, and then you distill it to kind of the bare essence. All right, so that's how we started. What we do later is we don't jump into background. We don't start talking about other people doing the same work that we did or comparing us to other people. We start to kind of talk a little bit about the field in general. What is essential tremor? What is Parkinson's disease? That they are characterized by a tremor. Not all Parkinson's patients have tremor, but most have. That classification of the Parkinson's disease is difficult. My wife's father possibly has a Parkinson, but it's really hard to tell. So, he went for some tests, and the tests are inconclusive. They say, yeah, you probably have Parkinson. So then the doctor said, okay, maybe you should just start taking this medication for Parkinson. And he started, and it doesn't do anything for him. So his hands kind of tremor a little bit, and with the medication or without, it's exactly the same. So does it mean he has Parkinson, or does it mean that he's just not reacting to that particular drug? So chances are, if he's not reacting to the drug, that he doesn't have a Parkinson, because most Parkinson patients react to that drug, right? But yeah, it's kind of hard. The only reliable way of discovering Parkinson is when they already are in advanced stages, doing fMRI scan of their brains. Then you can see that there are some damaged, areas in the brain which are caused typically by Parkinson's disease. But in the very early stages, it's kind of really hard to distinguish. And why it is important to distinguish it at the very early stages? Because if you start taking medication in the very early stages, you will really slow down the progression of the degeneration of the brain, right? So you can kind of make a person basically stable on the same level for extended period of time. Whereas if they don't take that medication early and the degeneration happens, there is nothing you can do. You cannot really recover. You can only slow down the progression. So kind of early detection is kind of important. And we sort of talked a little bit about it at the beginning. So then we talk about related work. So we talk about, what other people did. And we, in particular, were competing with the Chinese research group led by the AI or researcher, I don't know how to pronounce it, who were achieving quite high accuracy of the classification. They were using kind of support vector machine, and they were using very clever techniques for the tremor analysis, and they were kind of reaching, over 90% accuracy, quite high. And we were having trouble reaching the same level. So we were doing some tricks, and we were doing some improvements of the methods that we were using, and we couldn't get it. So you can, by reading the paper, you can think that we sort of stepped back and we thought about it. And if you think about it, you can see that when somebody has a Parkinson's disease, then the degeneration of the brain causes them to misalign the feedback loop, which controls the fine muscle movement, to the fine muscle control. So you have a kind of a sensory channels which kind of give you sensory information to your brain. You have visual feedback, and you can feel. So if I grab something, my brain knows when I'm touching it, and my eyes kind of tell me when I'm there, right? And I have to tell my muscles, especially the fine control muscles, of how to do the squeezing and where to position my hand. And when the misalignment happens, then this feedback the information which comes to my brain and the feedback which I give to my muscles is slightly off. The timing is slightly off. You can simulate this by heavily drinking, for example. If you drink a lot of alcohol, sometimes the timing will be misaligned and your hands will start shaking, and you may have hard time fitting a device into a small hole precisely because of the timing. You will start losing the fine muscle control, right? And with the essential tremor, that's exactly what happens. People are kind of have this misalignment slightly more than other people. Everybody has it. It's just that most healthy people can kind of compensate for that misalignment. And with the Parkinson, it happens in part of the brain which is responsible for it, and then it sort of influences the way they do it. And then with the essential tremor, it happens also, but in a slightly different part of the brain. So if you occupy the Parkinson person with some distractions, now the total capacity of processing information that they have in the brain has to do two things at the same time. They have to do the cognitive distraction task that we tell them to do. At the same time, they have to do this biofeedback of fine motion control with their hands. So you may think, okay, that's what will happen, that if they're distracted, the shake will be bigger, and then when they are focusing on the task, the shake will be smaller. Whereas with the essential tremor, it doesn't matter, because it's not the same part of the brain which is affected by the disease. So the cognitive load will have no influence of how much their hands shake. But it didn't happen this way. Of course, we have this kind of explanation after we discovered the data from discovered this property from the data. So we collected a lot of tremor data from essential tremor patients and from Parkinson's disease patients. And then once we were processing the data, we discovered that with the distraction tasks, the patterns are different. How we came up with this, starting with the distraction tasks in the first place. It happens that the father of the main person who was doing the study also has a Parkinson's disease, and his son noticed that when they talk and he drinks tea, if they don't talk and he drinks tea, he is okay. But when they talk, his hand just shakes like that, right? So he kind of hypothesized that maybe by distracting, the shake actually increased. And we did that. We kind of let them being distracted and let them being focused. So we had to find out how to distract them and how to make them focus. So one of the tests that we did with focusing was we mounted a laser pointer onto the smartphone by tape, and then we put a big target on the wall, and we told the people to kind of aim at the center of the target with the laser, and they were kind of really trying hard to do this kind of task, and that was focusing, right? So they were not focusing on the hand directly, but they were focusing on the pointer of the laser pointer and trying to kind of aim correctly at the target. There were some tasks that we tried where they actually were focusing on the hand. For example, with the, this game of rolling the ball in the maze, right? So trying to avoid the holes. So we had similar sort of setup where you have a kind of a center and you're trying to roll the ball to the center and keep it in the center, right? So your hand is shaking and you're trying to roll the ball and keep it at the center for as long as you can, and so on. So we trialed out a number of different tasks and different kind of scenarios and so on, and we picked the ones which were kind of giving the biggest effect. So we discarded some which were not showing a lot of effect, and we only showed the ones which give a lot of effect, right? So here is the lesson. One lesson is, nowhere in the article there is a story about the father. Nowhere in the article is the background story of how we came up with those tests and how we even started with trying things out, right? We don't tell it. Why we don't tell it? It's kind of irrelevant for the data, and it's not really relevant for the case at hand, right? We could have. And a lot of students who write master theses, they tell us a lot of stories of how they did things and how they came up with ideas and why they tried this or that and it didn't work and so on, right? And then you have a very nice, 150 pages thesis, which talks a lot about different things. But it's kind of not relevant often, right? You have to kill your darlings sometimes. You have to remove things which you feel are kind of cleverly done or smart or whatever, or very, interesting to you, but not necessarily interesting to the reader. So what's more is that this study didn't start like this study at all. We were not doing a trauma study, actually. It's a side effect of another study. We were trying to do a study on alcohol consumption and tremor, because there is anecdotal evidence that if you have Parkinson's disease and you have shaky hands, and if you drink a little bit of alcohol, the shaking slows down, and you can, play cards with your friends or play chess, right? We had some people saying, yeah, of course, when they go visit their friends to play, some card games or whatever, they kind of have 50 milligrams of alcohol, and then they go and they have a glass of wine and they have a fantastic evening, and the hands almost don't shake, right? But there is no scientific evidence that happens. So we thought, okay, let's do a study. Let's run a study. We give alcohol to some Parkinson patients. We don't give to others. We measure how much their hands shake. We calculate the things, and we know we will have a scientific result. We applied for the ethical approval for the study, and it was rejected. They said we cannot give alcohol to elderly people. We were shocked, right? So it's like, okay, so what can we do now? So we thought, we asked the commission, what if the people just drink alcohol? We don't tell them to drink. It just happened that they drink. They said, that's okay, but you cannot tell them to drink, right? So we said, okay, so let's do it differently. we will not tell people to drink, but if they do drink, they will log it when they drink and what they drank, right? Do they drink vodka or do they drink wine, and when? And then because they logging it on the phone, we make the phone call them, like, you know, wake things up from time to time, and we will measure the handshake, right? So when they logging things, we will measure the handshake as a side effect. And then when they don't log things, then we measure them occasionally of how much they handshake. So we ran the study for 2 weeks with like 20 people, and nobody drank at the time. Like crap. But we were doing the study in another city. So we had our university in one town, and most people who were our patients with the group that we work were from another city, which happened to have a big earthquake, right? And then when the big earthquake happened, there were very frequent aftershakes. So, and the aftershakes were quite big. And there was another hypothesis that the stress also influences your shakes, that if you're more stressed, then you're shaking more, and then if you're more relaxed and you have more relaxed environment, the shaking is less. And then we thought, great, I mean, the aftershakes really stress people out. We can measure how much the stress influences the shakes. So we asked them to log when the aftershake happens, right? So because then we can measure how much they were shaking before the aftershake and after the aftershake. And as I told you, some of the aftershakes were really big. So we were there when one happened, and like it was really shaking the building. Like I thought the windows will crack and pop out because it was kind of quite intense. So there's a funny side story. So we there with the other researchers. We have this group of, I don't know, 15 people, and this big aftershake happens. And my first thing in my head is, great, now they can pick their phones and measure the shakes, because they're all really freaked out, they're really stressed, right? And I'm looking at the other lady, and she didn't thought about that at all, right? She was only thinking about calming them down and kind of moving them to a safe place, that if the windows crack, they don't get the glass on their heads or whatever. So unfortunately, we didn't do that, right? We didn't ask them to pick their phones and measure how stressed they were at that time, because they were actually really stressed. So anyway, we told them this, and they say, okay, so look when you are drinking alcohol, when you're smoking cigarettes, because nicotine also kind of has the calming effect, and also when you stress, when the aftershake happens. Well, surprise, surprise, 2 weeks later, you know, there were 5 aftershakes in 2 weeks period, and nobody logged it, right? And then we thought, yeah, maybe when they're stressed, they're not gonna pick their phones and log that the aftershake happens, right? So then what? You know, we like almost 2 months into a study, we did a lot of data collection, and we have no results. We kind of don't have any results about the alcohol. We have no results about the shakes. So then we thought, okay, maybe we can do something with the food. Maybe, you know, we can find some correlations with the food. So then we asked them to log when they eat and roughly what they've eaten. So we make a very simple user interface, and we let them log what they've eaten. And we even had one lady who was not very keen on the mobile phones, but she wrote us on a piece of paper detailed date, times, and what she was eating and drinking. So that was great. We put it into a computer. So that was another month. We put it into a computer. We try to cluster it. We try to find any correlations of any sort, any, you know, things, nothing. Like, okay, like by that time, we were almost 6 months into a study. We tried all those things, came up with no results whatsoever. So then, you know, what can you do? And the main author is a master's student. He's doing his master thesis. That work is based on his master thesis, right? So we're 6 months into his master project, and he has no results. We did a lot of work. We collected a lot of data, and then what? And none of it is in this paper, and none of it is in his thesis, right? So we did 6 months of work, and it's not here, not visible. But we did have a lot of data. We have a lot of tremor data, right? So then we thought, let's do it. Let's just forget about everything else. Let's forget about alcohol, food, and stress. Let's just try to see the characteristics of the tremor. We had, by that time, we had 6 months of a lot of shakes, right? So we put it into a computer, we ran through the different classifiers, and that's how we started this paper. So that's how we started competing with the Chinese group, which was basically doing that. They were basically trying to classify essential tremor from the Parkinson's disease based on characteristics of the tremor. By that time, we only had the Parkinson's patients. So then we thought, well, we need some other patients who don't have Parkinson. So that's why we contacted another group, which was focusing on essential tremor, and we got a couple of participants to give us samples of how their hands shake, and that's how we kind of started. So the whole process was really long. The study was not designed with the tremor in mind. It was designed with the influence of the originally with the alcohol, but subsequently with food and stress, and we just couldn't get any reasonable results based on that. There were multiple reasons for this. One reason was that elderly people whose hands shake are not very great at logging things, right? So the user interface needs to be really simple and needs to be kind of general, right? So, and if you have if you collect general data, they usually cancel out. So you may have food which really helps you and food which really makes you shake more, but if we don't see those kind of a fine distinction, you just get noise at the end. So because the data which was coming in was sort of general, not very specific, that wasn't, productive enough. Also, they wanted to help. Of course, they want to provide this information, but providing detailed information apart from that one lady was kind of tedious, and there was no easy way to do that. So anyway, we kind of fast forward. We did the tremor study. We compared them to the essential tremor study, and guess what? We got results which were worse than the Chinese group, right? So he could do his master thesis and write about it, but it wasn't a good result. It was sort of a repeating of somebody else's research with worse results, right? So we couldn't, we almost couldn't meet them. Like we were almost there, but not quite. So we were a little bit below what they achieved. And of course, that was a much bigger group, and they had many, PhD students working on it and so on. And we were like just 2 people competing. So we couldn't reach the same level, and we thought, okay, now what? So that was already like almost, I don't remember, like 8 months into his thesis. So the master project that the other universities are 12, it's a year project, right? So you have kind of a year to do your studies. You start, and then a year later you have your deadline to submit your thesis. People can extend it to 18 months, but most people finish kind of within a year. Again, so then what, right? So we really were kind of panicky. And then he came up with this tea idea. So we thought, okay, let's try it, right? Because he was just visiting his father. He noticed that kind of tea drinking thing. And we then set up this laser and so on, and we tried to do that. So if you read this paper, there is nothing what I just told you. There is nothing about the previous studies. There is nothing about what didn't work. There is nothing about all the things that we tried. And there is nothing about the first like 8 months of the project. The only thing which is here is the actual thing that worked, which is the final thing which we tried last, right? So that's also kind of a lesson that, sure, you will do a lot of things, but those are kind of like a scaffolding for your main building. And then when the main building is ready, you take all the scaffolding away, right? You don't show it, you don't discuss it, you just focus on the nice building that you produced. So that's what in short is that. Okay, so then in the background, we do a little bit of a comparison of why this research is hard. So we say what exactly tremor is and why it is difficult to distinguish between essential tremor and Parkinson's tremor, that you cannot really do it based on the frequency. You cannot easily do that using the characteristics of the spatial variation in the position of the hand. Because they kind of, almost identical. We were hoping that they are distinguishable enough that we can kind of extract it out of data, but it turns out to be hard. Okay, so then we talk about the classification. We provide evidence for the various studies that were done before, and that's another sort of focus point that I want to tell you here is that when you're doing your background, when you did your background for the research project planning, you said, okay, these people did that, these people did that, and these people did that, and you provide some sort of papers of what you talked about, what you read about. And that's fine. For the research project planning, you sort of cover the area and you bring some documents, some reports about things that are within that area, and you say what they did and what they've done. Because you haven't done yet anything. You may have a problem in your mind that you want to discuss, and within that problem domain, those articles make sense, and that's how you do it for the research project planning. But then when it comes to writing your thesis, you have to rewrite it a little bit. So you don't do it the same way anymore. You bring the background in the context of your own work, right? You only present what's relevant to the case that you're making, to the case that you want to build. The reader at that point already knows what we did, and it's sort of it makes sense for us to link that together. So to say what other people did in the same kind of space compared to us, what they used and what we used, right? So you have to be quite mindful when you're presenting the background in your own thesis that you kind of link it to your own work, that you make it relevant to your own work. I need to understand why I'm reading this, right? If you tell me I'm doing research in databases in a particular problem, and then you tell me about, different types of databases, I'm like, why I'm reading this? Why are you telling me that? You need to be clear to the reader why the reader is reading about somebody else's work, because it somehow links to you. It was either an inspiration to your work, was a kind of a mechanism that you used, or you want to contrast it, that they've done it this way and you're doing it differently, or whatever. It has to be some sort of relationship between what you did and what you're telling me other people did. If there is no relationship, then why are you telling me this, right? Yeah, we went into a little bit of details, and then we had to have a kind of a description of exactly what we use and the methodology, how we measured the various indicators. So we kind of have those different experiments, and some of the experiments are with eyes open, some are with eyes closed, and some are with the laser pointer, some are with those games, and so on. We're kind of describing everything here. So it is quite late into a paper, right? It's so the background has been set, that the general story has been told, and now we're kind of going down into details of exactly how we did that, right? How we measured that. Why are we doing it? Well, because by that time it's very clear to the reader if the reader is interested in reading it or not, right? All the juicy parts were already told, right? And when people are reading your thesis, they will start by reading your abstract. Oh, it's relevant, and they may skip the whole body. They will kind of read your conclusions and see what exactly you did, what results you've got. Then they will decide whether to read the thesis, but they sort of make the judgment based on the information which is in the abstract and in the conclusions in a way. So the middle is kind of for the hard readers, for the hardcore readers, which really needs to know exactly what happened. Okay, so then we have some results, and we sort of discuss how it flips between the Parkinson's disease and essential tremor. That for the Parkinson's disease, some of the tasks are kind of harder with distraction or with concentration, and for essential tremor it kind of flips. So we have some kind of a cutoff point. All right, what else do we talk about here? We talked a little bit about so we did talk about wavelets. Any of you know what wavelets are? So you can do kind of signal processing in different ways. And depending on the nature of the signals you're processing, you can achieve different results. So typically you have a kind of some sort of signal coming in, and you have a frequency domain, so kind of how the frequency changes over time, and you have the amplitude, how amplitude changes over time. So you have kind of a frequency domain and time domain, and in the time domain you have the sort of the amplitude changes. And depending on the nature of the processing, you can use some sort of you can use like Fourier transform to translate the signal that you're getting kind of more into a frequency domain to see more of how the frequencies change or what the frequency decomposition looks like. But with the essential tremor, we were thinking that it's not only the kind of the frequency, which is almost always constant, but also how it looks like in the kind of so if the frequency is not very big, but the amplitude kind of influences the signal, you would like to preserve some of the temporal information when you're doing your processing. And that's why kind of wavelet processing is kind of more valuable, because it preserves the sort of temporal aspects of the space. And you can use a different base function for kind of doing the transforms. So you know how Fourier transform works? If I have kind of a complex shape, I try to come up with kind of sinusoidal-like signals and build that kind of a complex shape out of the, a number of sinusoids, right? And then by the choices of those sinusoids, I can tell something about the signal, right? But I cannot really tell much about the amplitude of how the amplitude was kind of happening over time. So I kind of lost the temporal aspects because I translated the signal into a plethora of sinusoidal functions. And then I kind of only tell you about the signal by the choices I've made about the sinusoids, right? Whereas if you do the wavelets, you not only have that, but you also preserve a little bit of the temporal aspect. So we did, because one of the, and why it's important, because we also spent quite a lot of time trying to, because if you have, so let's see, like if I have some complex function, right? I can translate it to say I need kind of some low frequency base, which shapes the kind of the base, and then I have some sort of a high frequency components which build the rest of the signal. And now if I combine those three, I kind of get something like this, right? More or less. So those are kind of a nice sinusoidal functions for Fourier. We always kind of do this. But for wavelets, you can pick a base functions which have arbitrary shape. I can pick, for example, function like that, or I can pick kind of a different shape function and kind of modulate, kind of build this out of kind of these components, and then because I can stretch it or squeeze it, I have certain characteristics in the kind of a temporal domain. So we spent substantial amount of time kind of investigating if we can come up with a clever function basis that will model the signal better than the sinusoidal or the kind of the very simplistic wavelets, right? And I still think that you can, but you cannot really do it in humanly fashion. So you cannot just think and model it by hand. You have to use computers to kind of try millions of different combinations of those to evolve the best performing ones automatically, because we tried to kind of do it by trial and error, and we were getting some sort of hit and miss successes, but it's kind of not a good approach. You basically would need to automate it and feed it into some sort of mechanism that will generate those functions kind of automatically for you, and then measure how well they perform. So we spent, time, because we tried a couple of the well-known ones, and we found out that the Dabuchier was sort of performing better than the other ones, and we kind of used that at the end. So we spent some time discussing it, and we used support vector machines for the actual clustering. So we discussed that as well. And this paper is not really targeting the machine learning community. This paper is more targeting the kind of medical community to kind of convey the idea that the distraction and attention is important. So we didn't spend a lot of time on the machine learning side to explain exactly what happened with those sort of algorithms and how we came up with all the parameters, but we spent substantial amount of time of the paper discussing that as well. If this paper was targeting the machine learning community, then the initial part would be smaller. The discussion of the nature of the tremor would be kind of a little bit more condensed, and this section would be expanded bigger, right? So depending for whom you're writing your article or your argument or your thesis, you have to balance some of those things, right? You cannot put everything in. You have to emphasize some of the things more than others. And in our case, that machine learning is actually more complicated than the paper talks about, and we focused more on the on this distraction and attention and the tasks that we did, because we thought the medical community will be interested more in that. It's not a medical journal, but it's sort of in the area of a Parkinson's disease, and it's sort of leaning more towards the medical uses of the technology. So could we use just an accelerometer instead of a mobile phone for this study? Did we need to use a mobile phone at the end? Yeah?
To get this shaking, I think it would just work with...
Exactly, it would work exactly with the accelerometer. And in fact, because we ran out of time, we didn't try it with just an accelerometer, but we had a kind of a plan to try it with the high frequency accelerometer kind of mounted on the wrist. And it gives you a much more accurate data than the ones we got. We were using phones which were not very stable in the frequency, how they sample the accelerometer data, and they were only sort of in the like 60 to 80 hertz range, right? I mean, it's okay. It's enough for the results, because as you see, the here, for example, the PD is 3 to 6 hertz and ET is 4 to 8, right? So even if we take the highest frequency component, it's 8, right? So the data that we investigate is an order of magnitude slower than the frequency we're sampling. So quality of the sample, great, not bad at all. I mean, if you have a factor of 10, but if you can have a factor of 20, it would still improve the results. It would still kind of remove some of the noise that you're getting from the sampling, right? So we had a plan of attaching the high frequency accelerometer and getting the data, but we just ran out of time. So even though it says it's on the mobile device, it didn't need to be on the mobile device for this particular result. But what's interesting about it running on the mobile device is that everybody can do those tests at home, right? So you can sort of, make an app, and your parents or your grandparents you can give them the phone, and the phone can sort of do something and kind of tell them how likely is it that the shakes is caused by the Parkinson's disease, right? Can we do that? can we make an app and say, yeah, put it on the App Store and put it on the Google Play. You all can download it, give to your grandparents, and it says, yeah, 80% chance your shake is caused by Parkinson. Or no, it looks more like essential trauma. Can we do that? We could, but we'd be violating some of the regulations which are about medical devices. So any device which makes a recommendation or makes a what's that called? Diagnosis, has to be certified. It has to be certified as a medical device, and you have to go through a very lengthy, a very expensive process of certification, right? So you cannot just sit at home, do this app, and make it. You have to go through the, approval process and certification process of being a medical device. And what's the problem with this? Well, the problem with this is that all the tests have to be done on a particular device. So if I have, a Nexus S device and I run my app on the Nexus S from 2015, then it's certified on Nexus S on 2015 model with this operating system and this firmware version and this blah, 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 right? So, mobile space doesn't work this way. I mean, next month, I'm going to do an update on this phone and this certification isn't valid anymore, right? So it's not feasible to do it. So there is a bit of a tension between kind of innovation in the medical space and the certification process which is required. So what happens is you make this app, you make a big splash screen saying this is not a medical device and this is not a medical application. And then most of the time you save, but if you make this kind of judgment and say to somebody that they are 80% chance that they have a Parkinson, that somebody can look at it and say, this is a diagnosis. It looks really like a diagnosis. You're violating the law, right? So you have to make it cleverly enough that it doesn't look like a diagnosis, right? It's kind of complicated. Yeah, what else? We did so he wrote his master thesis at the end, telling a little bit more than what's in the paper. You can find his thesis as well. You can so after he did the master thesis, we kind of worked on the paper. So you may ask why there are 4 authors instead of 2 if it's only 2 of us doing the research. In fact, everybody helped, right? So he is a master student doing the main work. I was his supervisor, helping him out and setting up the tasks and kind of doing the kind of a recovery process while once certain things didn't work. She was the kind of a medical person she's a psychologist, but she had the contacts with the medical world, and she was the one interfacing us with the actual Parkinson patients, right? It's not easy as a computer scientist kind of saying, yeah, I would like to have 20 Parkinson patients to work with. You have to get certain approvals. You have to have certain reliability that you will not say stupid things in front of the elderly people and so on. So she was the one sort of interfacing us with the real world. As I'm saying, if I was alone with those Parkinson patients, I would probably shout to them, hey, come on, take the phones now and do this, right? Because I was totally not threatened by the shakes, and I kind of, I didn't appreciate it, how stressed they were, right? But she could tell they were really freaking out, and the really proper thing was to kind of calm them down and make sure that kind of they feel safe, even though I was pretty sure everybody was safe, right? So she helped a lot in this kind of a human aspect of the study, and he was a information science professor who was helping us with the data analysis and the statistics and the way that we did correctly, right? So it kind of, the paper has 4 authors, but everybody kind of contributed, and if you take any of those persons out, the research probably wouldn't happen the way it is presented in the paper. Of course, for the thesis, he is the sole author, and he described the kind of a little bit more to the process that it's in the paper, because we had to condense it to the format that the journal requires. All right, and that's kind of the story. So it's longer than a blog post. It has, I don't know, 10 pages. It talks not only about the results, but a little bit about the methodology and the way the experiments were structured, a little bit about wavelets and the machine learning and the processing that we've done. But if you were to distill it to a simple argument, the argument is, if you take the data out of the device, all the spatial temporal data, you'll get less results than if you include the cognitive load, so distraction or attention. And we have evidence that that was the case for those 20 or 30 people that we've tested. And that's the kind of the essence of the paper, the kind of the main argument. Okay, you have questions? Or yep.
You mentioned that there was no scientific proof for tremor in Parkinson's diseases when they drank alcohol.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Does that also come for people with essential tremor and not Parkinson's disease?
No.
Okay.
So there is no evidence that if you drink a little bit of alcohol, it will help with the essential tremor. But it does help with the Parkinson's disease, same as with the nicotine. So actually, there are some evidence now. I don't know how they run the experiments. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. I will say nothing. But there is some evidence that some doctors actually recommend now for the early stage Parkinson patients to, unofficially, they recommend to start smoking, because there is some scientific evidence that if you provide or use the nicotine patches, because if you provide a little bit of a nicotine, it seems to be regulating some of the brain chemistry in such a way that slows down the progression of the disease. So, and also there is an evidence for, like statistical evidence for smokers and non-smokers, that the smokers have less risk factors developing into Parkinson's disease. They have other risk factors, of course, but they are less likely to develop a Parkinson's disease to the advanced stages compared to a non-smokers. So it's a little bit controversial, same as with the alcohol studies. It's a bit controversial. In most countries, you cannot really do a proper study, involving alcohol. You can do the ones that we did, and if we did that, there would be kind of a selection bias, because it wasn't us mixing the people and telling one group to drink and one not to drink. It would be kind of people who self-selected to drink versus people who self-selected not to drink. And then you have this selection bias that, maybe people who select to drink have certain traits or certain characteristics which make them prone to particular, outcomes of the study, right? And you cannot then counter-argue that. So to counter-argue that, you have to do a blind mixing, that you have a group, you randomly assign them to two different groups, and you make a test group not drink and the group under the study to drink. But you normally cannot do that. Maybe in some countries you can, and maybe there is some evidence that they kind of did that properly. But it's hard to kind of provide some evidence like that. Yeah. So we only say there is anecdotal evidence, people reporting that happens. There is also a very interesting case. So I will occupy you for another 2 minutes. There was a very interesting case because we had an engineer in our sample. We had a guy who was really into measuring his own disease, right? And he really loved the study, and he made his own devices for measuring how much his hand was shaking and so on. So for example, he had a kind of a simple system with a piece of rope and a pen, and he was drawing circles. And when his hand was shaking a lot, the circles had certain, variance. And when he was not shaking much, it was kind of really accurate, and he could measure how much he was shaking himself, right? He was actually doing that before we did our studies with him. And he said, "Wow, great, I can now buy an Android phone and do that on the phone." So, and the reason why he was doing it was that if you have a Parkinson's disease, you take a medication, and the medication slows the progression and slows your shaking, but it only works for about 3 years if you normally take it. And after 3 years, it stops working. So then you have to go off the medication for like 6 months on another medication, which almost never works, to clear your system. And then when you clear your system, you can go back to the original one, and it works again. And you get to like a single dose, and then in 1 year you have to double the dose, and then it becomes like, even if you double it, it doesn't work anymore, and then you have to repeat the cycle. But he discovered that if he measures himself exactly, and he knows when the worst case happens, and then when he takes the medication, he can take like 30% of the medication that he would normally take every day when he was eating it every day, right? So instead of eating it every day, he only eats it when he has the worst case of like the previous dose stops working. And he can measure when the previous dose stops working by measuring his shakes, right? So he doses himself with the medication in such an efficient way that actually he said he's already on his 7th year of the medication, which normally should only last like 3 years, right? He said, great, let's do that. Let's make an app. Let's measure the shakes for people, and let's tell them to take a certain dose of that medication that they take, because then we can really extend the usefulness of that medication, right? No, you cannot do that neither, right? You cannot tell people to take a certain dosage of the medication. Only doctor can do that, and of course the doctor don't know your shakes every day. So the doctor says take that much, for the next half a year, and then you visit the doctor in half a year. He runs some tests and says, yeah, you're still fine. Take the same dose for the next half a year, or double it because the previous dose doesn't work anymore, right? So we tried that as well, didn't get approval. And you have to go through that sort of medical certification process to be able to do this for people. But interestingly enough, you can do that for your family members yourself. So you can write an app for your grandparents, and that's legal. And you can tell them to use it and take that medication. And you can do it on yourself as well, right? So for your family members and for yourself, you can do whatever you like. You don't need any, approvals. Yeah.
Can you then fork the repository, compile it, and use it?
What's that?
Well, if the code is open source.
Yeah, exactly. You can do an open source code base and tell, elderly people to kind of compile it and use it, and All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, so that's all for today. What we will do tomorrow is we will talk a little bit about rigor in sort of system research and repeatability, and we will kind of discuss a little bit this paper. So I emailed both, so yeah, read it before the lecture, so we will not be doing the reading in the lecture. We will just kind of focus and discuss how they've done it and what the recommendation is. Thank you.